Okay, so we are still in the morning session. I have the privilege of welcoming David Crewe-Brown to the session. So David is no stranger to SAPIX. I think he's been around with us for many, many years. He is an existing board member of SAPIX, is APIX or ASCM certified on a number of those certifications. So he's very, very knowledgeable when it comes to all things supply chain management. So David is the general manager of Vital Alliance South Africa. I'm not going to read through his bio. I'm going to leave that for him to do, because I think everybody likes to talk about themselves in their own special way. And the topic that we're going to be looking at today is accelerating supply chain maturity in developing African countries. So, if we think that we have problems in our day-to-day supply chains, public health is something out of a horror movie. I was just chatting to David backstage now about a session I listened to of his quite some time back about how they use paper for all the processing in the public hospitals. I mean, you can just imagine how there is no levels of accuracy at all to speak to. And apparently this is commonplace in the public health sector in Africa. So, David, please can you share with us something really exciting in terms of breakthroughs that we are making in public health and how Vital Alliance are making a difference? So take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanya. Appreciate the introduction. Yes, unfortunately, that is still commonplace, but it doesn't need to be. And I think hopefully today we can share a little bit of our journey and what we believe is the art of the possible in terms of supply chain maturity. I'm just checking, Tanya. Can you see my screen all right? Is it full screen? And there we go.
Yes.
I think that looks good.
Good to go.
All right. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Great to have you and really looking forward to telling a little bit of my story. So maybe first off, just to let me just get this going here. Just to check. So who among you this morning has taken your pill? I know that I have, and I think many of us do. I'm still taking the good old COVID, vitamin C and zinc, so keeping my pills going. But if you had to think about the supply chain behind that pill, what does it take for you to be able to get that into your home and for you to take that pill in the morning? And I think many people now with COVID actually do know a lot about supply chain. Even my wife is able to tell me a few things about supply chain, and I think that's, I suppose, the blessing that came out of COVID. But on the downside, the complexities of supply chain are still very much unknown. And if you think about this pill, that a flower was harvested on the snowy slopes of the Himalayan mountains. No, I'm just joking. But in reality, there's an API ingredient that needs to be collected. That's the raw material that gets mixed into a final product that then goes into, gets made into a tablet, put into a blister pack, shipper packed pallet, warehouse onto a truck. They ship it into customs, through customs onto a truck, into a warehouse storage location where it's picked, packed and shipped, and goes through to the pharmacy, to the consulting room, and finally to you as the patient, or to the patients that we serve. And that's a mouthful just thinking about it. But I think the challenge is that there's complexity at each of those steps along the process. And you need to know how much is needed, what are the lead times, how much stock should be kept, and all of those things are required for one little tablet. As Tanya introduced me, I'm the general manager of Vital Alliance, and I'm not going to speak about myself too much, but more on the topic for today. But really, Vital Alliance was born out of a technology organization, One Network, and a logistics company, Imperial Logistics, that many of you should be well aware of. And the focus really for Vital Alliance has been on supply chain planning services and really enabling the improvement of supply chain planning services with appropriate technology. And really today, what I'll share is how that pill gets into the hands of patients across Africa and further afield where we play. And so I'll be just really sharing the view of how do you accelerate this journey into the supply chain maturity, especially for developing markets, especially in the public sector environment. And I'll share 2 case studies of work that we've done across Africa as well. So supply chain challenges, as you all know, is to get all these rights, to achieve the 7 rights. But often what I found in my experience that you only get called as a supply chain practitioner when something goes wrong. So that's the only time you hear from people, and a lot can go wrong. But if you do plan properly, then you can achieve these 7 rights. And it's not just a pipe dream, but it's something that can be a reality. And that's what we found. And as Tanya mentioned, is this something that looks familiar in your space? Unfortunately, very familiar in the pharma supply chain space, pharmaceutical supply chain space, and managing with paper. You know, the complexity of it, the sheets that need to be filled in. And for a period, you can do pretty well with paper, but as the scale increases and as the challenges arise, many of the supply chain components will break, and many of those rights that we saw will become wrongs for sure. So what are the challenges that we're seeing in the supply chain, public health supply chain space? First off, very manual process. A lot of people working, like we saw in those photos, using paper, using those manual processes, very poor master data. And I think that's not just the pharmaceutical supply chain environment. I think that's kind of common across many businesses. And I think many of you will attest to that. But data not being available, the data accuracy being poor, not being able to know how much you have. So that lack of visibility, lack of good information coming through from the supply chain. Lots of systems that don't talk to each other, resulting in duplication, in errors, in multiple costs in terms of managing your supply chain. The people in the supply chain space are often pharmacists, not being trained. They've been trained to work with medicine and to know what medicine to dispense, but they're not being trained in what that means in accurately and being able to manage your storeroom in such a way that you're reducing your cost and increase your medicine availability. So they've been put into these complex environments and don't have the skills to do that. Often there's different agendas. The warehouse has a specific agenda in place. The procurement team want to have a specific procurement strategy, and then the customers would come at different times and really kind of how to balance those different agendas between everyone. And finally, what we've seen is that also not often having the funding to actually do the right thing, to get the right skills, to get the right systems in place and establish the right infrastructure. And the results of all of this is long lead times, high costs, write-offs that we see, so product that's just sitting there that has to get written off, and other places where we have stockouts where you don't have enough product, and really ultimately poor medicine availability. And so we've got to do something about changing this. So the question would be, is it possible to achieve supply chain perfection, or at least journey towards that supply chain perfection? Or all those wrongs that we often see that I've just spoken about, can they be changed and be turned into something right? And I think in our modern day, the one supply chain excellent story to talk to is the Amazon story, a real supply chain hero in many ways. They started as an online bookshop in 1994 and today sells online just about everything. They're worth $1.2 trillion, but they have mastered supply chain planning and logistics. They've moved to a 2-day delivery time, which was revolutionary at the time. And they've kind of moved from that to a 1-hour delivery time. And again, just almost incomprehensible that they can do that. They sell more than 12 million different products. Their scale is just enormous. 1.6 million packages are sold per day, which means that they're moving 66,000 orders are processed per hour. And how do they do that? They've invested in supply chain processes, in supply chain skills, in supply chain systems and capabilities, and have become an absolute leader in supply chain excellence, and something that we can look towards and grow from. So as Vital Alliance, we believe that it is possible to get to that supply chain, Amazon supply chain hero status. And we've put together what we call a supply chain or a maturity model to see supply chains mature across the different phases. And that's what I'm going to share with you a little bit today. So the different phases of maturity start off with that manual process that so many people operate in our environment, at least. And when a problem hits, you react and you fight, and you're fighting fires. The next phase is where you start doing some basic planning. You're able to anticipate, what do I do next? You move from there to starting to integrate across the business, so people start speaking to each other and systems and processes start linking up. You then start collaborating across all functions within the organization. And finally, when you get to that network orchestration, you are going beyond just your organization. If you think about the SCORE model, which some of you would be aware of, it's the plan, source, make, deliver, return model. That SCORE within your organization is linking to the plan, source, make, deliver, return in the next organization. And in the next organization, and to your supplier's organization, and to your supplier's organization. And you start really seeing that orchestration of saying, how do I look beyond my own, and how do I look at the bigger stream? So to give you a little bit of example, just to try and position this. So if I think about inventory management, across these five. First off, inventory management, paper. You're working with stock cards and ordering books. It takes a long time. You've got to send them by car from the pharmacy to the hospital that's serving you, or to the depot to get your stock. That takes time and effort. As soon as you start doing the system enablement, you're starting to manage your inventory on an electronic system. You're starting to get a little bit of visibility. Then you start really leveraging that technology and what we call advanced digitization, where you're establishing a center of excellence. You're using the functionality such as auto replenishment, where you don't have to do your own planning, but the system starts supporting you in the planning. Then you move into business integration, where the planning of inventory is starting to be done to meet demand. And typically we look at S&OP in the space, or what we call integrated business planning, where you start really planning not just for that microcosm, but you start planning across the organization. And then finally, real-time inventory management is where you start optimizing your inventory across the network. So you're not only wanting to say, well, what is best for me, but what is best for the network, and how do we keep inventory in the right places all along the network? So what have we practically seen in each of these supply chain levels of maturity? First off, I think this one people will be able to intuitively know, the paper-based firefighting space. There's really not a lot of planning that happens, very people-driven, very heavy on people. There's no good data to use and work from, and you only have really basic capabilities and limited controls. As soon as you start introducing a system, and often what we find is that this step from manual to system enabled is quite a big transition. For one, you need equipment, you need significant change management and getting the people who used to paper to start using electronic systems. And so it is an expensive and challenging step to take, but really the start of your digitization journey. People are trained, you're establishing those standard processes, you're getting master data. and a few reports and data analytics are starting to be done. As soon as you start integrating or seeing that advanced digitization, you're looking at how does your system integrate? How do you get standard master data, not just for my single tool, but to be used across different tools? How do you start really getting that visibility to do better decision making and drive continuous improvement? In the business integration space, you're integrating across the business, and this is where the typical ERPs play a strong role. You're getting that S&OP established, inventory is getting optimized. Not only is your stock available, but it's available at the best cost, and you're getting high quality of data, which starts allowing you to do things like predictive analytics. And then finally, when you're in the network orchestration, you are fully integrated with real-time supply chain planning processes. And really, this is including your business partners, not just your own organization. In this space, we often talk about the single version of the truth. Everyone is looking at the same information. It's not one part of your business is looking at one and another part. And in this space, it's not only just my business is looking at the same number, but my suppliers and my suppliers are able to see this is what the demand signal is that's coming down the line. How do we eliminate that bullwhip effect, and how do we start using this data to do better planning? We're getting real-time visibility, so your signals start coming through in real time. So as soon as a fire hits somewhere, you're able to start doing your contingency planning, and you can then start doing that with some of the fancy artificial intelligence and machine learning. So there's some very high-level tools that start playing in this network orchestration space. At the SAPEX June conference, that if you missed out, it's unfortunate, but we did a little survey during that session. And during that session, I found that people kind of rated themselves to say, well, where do they believe they are from a supply chain maturity level? And you can see some of the results. Many people just in that first part of system enablement, someone responding that they're still in the paper-based, and again, in our space, we see a lot of that. But really encouraging to see that some people are maturing into that business integration and even into the network orchestration part, which is really where you want to be if you're at the top end of supply chain planning and operations. I also asked the audience at the conference to say, well, what are the biggest inhibitors of growth? And you can see some of the things that came out here is that data quality, lack of really good people, not having the right systems, not being able to collaborate across supply chains, and others around data quality, strategy and management and funding, I think also came and played a role. So what are the results that we see as you start implementing solutions to move you up the space? What are the results that we see? So, or lack of results as in the manual space. So really poor service delivery and high out of stocks. Your costs seem to be high in this environment. You have high write-offs and long reaction times. It takes you a very long time to react to something because you're not getting that data feed through the system. As soon as you start putting a system in place, you get localized improvement, often siloed, unfortunately, because you are still just looking at my operation and my function. You're getting some visibility and people are trained. You're getting equipment in place. And what we would say is that there's significant change management that takes place. In the advanced digitization, you're seeing further reduction in out of stocks. Your inventory is starting to get optimized, and that means that you're reducing costs, visibility within the system environment, and that data-driven problem solving to have faster reaction time as soon as problems occur. Business integration, you're kind of really eliminating your out of stocks, so limited out of stocks, increased responsiveness, your ability to better manage on a dynamic basis. you're optimizing across your business, your inventory levels, and you're starting to balance demand and supply. And then with network orchestration, you can really almost eliminate out of stocks. You are getting inventory optimized not just for your own organization. Your planning is dynamic and continuous. You are really generating value, not just for yourself, but for the entire network. And so that's the results that typically we see at each of these phases. So if I had to reflect on our focus as Vitalliance, we really are trying to operate in a space where we are providing supply chain planning services enabled with appropriate technology. So what I'll share is what are the systems that we typically use and what we've seen in this pharmaceutical supply chain space as being effective in each of the steps. Clearly, in the manual process, you often are turning to Excel, which, don't get me wrong, it's often a really good tool to use, but it has its limitations. Low cost, but it can only go so far, unfortunately. So in our space, when you're going to system-enabled environment, you're looking at ELMIS, which is Electronic Logistics Management Information System. And that's your first implementation. You get the system and the processes need to be established. So you actually do a lot of work in mapping out processes and then figuring out, well, what of the process that they're doing at the moment manually needs to be changed. So your as is to be type of process mapping, but then also getting equipment and getting people trained up. We typically use in our environment OpenLMIS, which is a free to use tool that is supported by Vitalliance across multiple countries. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. And we do that through some trusted implementing partners that work alongside us. In the advanced digitization space, this is where we typically are not getting the full value out of the ELMS because it's on a standalone. And so phase 2 requires the enhancement of it. We, in this space, will start looking at linking it to other tools, such as One Network, which is a network-wide based tool. And that can enable things like demand planning, inventory optimization, advanced data management, start flagging risks within your supply chain. So that's what we see in that space. In the business integration, we actually would see almost like a fully integrated solution. So you've got your warehouse management system, financial systems, and all elements of the supply chain managed electronically. So typical ERP solutions. And for us, again, we use One Network in this environment. And then network orchestration, where you use that end-to-end supply chain business visibility. And this is kind of the final step where you can execute across multiple enterprises. And again, you need a tool that's able to do that, which is what we use One Network for. So where does OpenLMS and One Network play? If you kind of hear in terms of our healthcare solution landscape, those are the tools that predominantly we turn to. OpenLMIS, if you look at the tactical operational and execution planning landscape, largely plays in that bottom execution layer. And so it will help you operate on the inventory level. And then if we look at the One Network would operate almost end to end. So from the execution layer all the way up to your tactical planning. And so that's the space and the distinction that one looks at. Sometimes you're kind of migrating up as you look at the maturity from that lower end all through to the high end. So the two examples that I want to briefly share, the one is from Malawi. In Malawi, we use OpenLMIS, and OpenLMIS, as I mentioned, is a free-to-use tool that's been implemented across about 12 countries in Africa, of which Vitalliance is the steward of OpenLMIS. What it does is, for me, it's really, if I had to summarize, it's an effective inventory management tool, and it helps you with requisitions, order fulfillment, and it's got very good flows in terms of approval processes that it tracks. It helps with your stock and inventory management, gives you some good analytics and reporting to be able to see how well are we doing in terms of our stock management. It's got a mobile integration component, so you are able to manage parts of OpenLMS off a mobile device, and it's got some cold chain equipment tracking, which we've built in on the back end of people specifically asking for this on this whole vaccine journey that we've had. Open LMS was implemented in 2017 in Malawi, and it was through 28 of their districts and included the central hospitals. What we've seen with implementations of systems in the public health space is that often it's very program driven. So it could be for the HIV program or for the vaccine program or for family planning. In Malawi, it has been implemented across all health programs. And really, if you speak to the ministry, they see this tool as being what they call their system that is core to the supply chain digitization journey. So they really see OpenLMS as being that foundation for them. Quick look at one of the screenshots in terms of OpenLMS, and you'll see there closing balances, losses and adjustments, quantity used, what's the opening balance, what is the order that you need to place, and just even have some pricing information. So it's really a very good tool to use it for inventory management in this public healthcare space. So what did we see in terms of Malawi? They had improved data availability and visibility for decision making. Their replenishment planning was improved. Their time to place orders was reduced. They've seen really the pharmacists being able to focus on seeing patients because they've got less work to do on the inventory side, and improved skills and capabilities. Also, just a better understanding of what it means to manage inventory and supply chain principles. Those are kind of foreign to many of the people working in this space, and helping them to improve that goal of better medicine availability at lower costs. The second example is from Rwanda, where we implemented One Network. And really, if you, again, look at One Network, implementing provides the capability to plan across the full supply chain. So you can see from the healthcare facilities, clinics and hospitals, all the way through to the supplier on the back end that are sending medicine and raw materials through the chain. And as you can see, complex, often made in multiple different places. Those APIs are generated in few locations. So with an implementation of One Network, you've got these kind of benefits. The one is information available in real time. That's zero latency. So as soon as information becomes available in the network, it's available for anyone to see in terms of, oh, this production has started, this shipment is available, this shipment's been made, it is en route. So that kind of instant ability to see information in real time. The second one is looking at demand translation. So you don't have this typical thing where the demand signal isn't clear from the healthcare facility all the way down the chain. So you're getting this a good demand translation across the network. And then you get earlier visibility. If there's a fire that breaks out somewhere, you hear about it earlier and you can make some contingency plans and make some changes, being able to respond almost immediately. And then, as I mentioned at the start, that whole idea of the single version of the truth. You're not everyone's singing off the same hymn sheet, so to say. You don't have buffer upon buffer upon buffer, but you're really trying to flatten that proverbial bullwhip across your supply chain. So for Rwanda, it was implemented around, serving a population of around 12 million people, 900 clinics that operate with 40 distribution centers and 4 big warehouses, and approximately 3,000 products that they use in Rwanda. The scope of this was from the suppliers all the way through to the patient, and really integrating with your WMS and the ERP systems. And what is interesting for us is that Rwanda went from a paper-based system onto almost, I suppose, fairly onto a tool that had scope to mature into the different levels of the supply chain, and almost giving you that forward capability. And what are the things that we saw? We saw that replacement of the paper-based system, improved service levels for patients, and improved costs. Some operational efficiencies, stockouts at district pharmacies were reduced, and really looking at removing that waste and reducing the total cost to deploy, maintain, and support the supply chain for the Rwanda Department of Health. So really very excited to see what they're doing, and they're continuing to improve. Actually busy with another project for them right now, where they're going in their warehouse to using what some of you would see as standard practice. For Rwanda, it's quite and for this healthcare space, it's quite front, kind of leading technology, and that's just moving to using handheld scanning devices for all their processing. So all their pick, pack, and ship is now going to be done using handheld devices in their warehouse, and that's another thing that's being integrated into the solution that we're doing at the moment. So maybe in closing, what does it take to get to that supply chain hero status? And what are the things that I believe we've seen as learnings? So first off is leadership. You need them to champion the cause, set that vision, and map out the direction that you're going to take. Processes need to be established and standardized. You can't try and optimize a suboptimal process, because then you'll just get a suboptimal solution. So work on that process and get it optimized and standardized. Work with your people, develop them, get the right teams in place. Train the people, do change management effectively to get the buy-in, so they own the solution. It's not a solution that's being driven down to individuals, so they've got to have kind of this negative connotation with it. Select good tools, and I think a good point here is select the right tool for that specific environment at that point in time, because as you journey, you're going to go up that supply chain maturity. But don't put in a network orchestration tool from day one and expect them to operate at that level. Have the right tool, and then migrate up that path using more advanced tools as your process matures. Make sure put the effort into data. I think any work that we do, about 80% of the effort that we spend up front is really getting the data right, and work on getting that single version of truth, and then the continuous improvement mindset and culture. So if we go to close this out, maybe just a quick quote. So one of the quotes from USAID is meeting countries where they're at and creating workable solutions to support the journey beyond their current level of supply chain maturity. And that's really what we've been trying to drive. So supply chain, this is actually a billboard up the road from my house. I'm not quite sure what they're advertising, but the journey is clear. We need to be on this journey. And I think for many of you, you will be on that journey. So in Africa, from what I've seen, there are many wrongs and very few rights in the supply chain environment. Many people don't get their medicine when they're meant to, and this can be very detrimental to people's health. The problem is complicated. So many people, so many steps in the process, but we believe there is a path to supply chain maturity that will see improved medicine availability and improved healthcare for all. It's a long journey. It's not just a single step, but we take it one step at a time. And so maybe tomorrow morning when you take your medicine, when you take that pill, give some thought to what it took to get into the hands of you as the final consumer or the patient. but also know that there's many of us out there trying to make sure that we improve the supply chains in this pharmaceutical healthcare space so that others can also get their medicine on time. And with that, I thank you. Tanya, I hope we got time for a few questions.
Yes, we do have time for a few questions. There aren't questions, but there are some comments in the chat. Your points on what takes a supply chain hero is spot on. And then Claire is saying that she completely agrees. And there are lots of clapping hands coming at the bottom. So this is a good sign. So I don't know if there are questions. Please pop them into the Q&A tab for David, because I think that there have to be questions on the nature of this type of project. I mean, for me, there are a few things. So, I mean, we know that in specifically in the public health space, what do you call them? Pharmacists are expected to be supply chain professionals. And that's really a big ask because of the nature of the business. So how did you go about creating or getting those skills in place to move forward with the project? Did you have to build capacity before, during? Did you even do it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was almost on the job training. So taking those pharmacists who are part of this journey of a new, often ELMS implementation, and really working with them, explaining not only how the tool works, but really explaining the process. And surprisingly, I think you're right. I mean, many of them have had no formal training, but some of them, I mean, I've come across a few pharmacists who like surprise me by their level of kind of like ingenuity. And I think, all of us have a pantry at home, or many of us have a pantry at home. And when the mayonnaise is finished in the fridge, hopefully you can go to your pantry and get the new bottle of mayonnaise out. So all of us have a bit of a sense of there's inventory in my cupboard. As I use my inventory, I need to make sure that I replenish this inventory that I have, and really using those basic examples, like using things like milk to say, how much milk do you think you're going to buy next week? And they would say, 2-liter bottles, because I've got a family of 4 and that's how much milk we use. And then you'd say, well, what if you had visitors coming over and another family of 3 people were visiting? What would that do? Oh, I'd need another bottle of milk. And so you can start demonstrating things like forecasting to say, well, sometimes you need to adjust your forecast depending on what the situation is, and you've got to build in additional information. And so really trying to help people with some basic understanding of supply chain. And then I think programs, I mean, what SAPEX have done through Africa, and I think some of the other ACI, I think have seen ACI do some great work in and around Africa as well, in terms of helping improve supply chain knowledge and understanding. And so, yeah, I think those are some of the small things, but yeah, it doesn't come overnight. And unfortunately, some of those training programs still have no supply chain in them. I know that there's some of my colleagues in the space that are advocating, some of the pharmacists that work in the supply chain space are advocating for pharmaceutical degrees and pharmaceutical courses to actually include supply chain, because actually inventory management becomes such a big part of being effective in the space.
No, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of work being done in that space already. People that deliver have developed a supply chain competency model, specifically on the pharmaceutical sector. So I think there's a lot being done, but I think there's a long way to go. I have a question here, and I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this question. Kind of puts you on the spot. Changing supply chain models in a public health space requires dollars. How much?
Too much, unfortunately. Yeah, no, it's expensive. What is encouraging is that we have lots of donors playing in the space. So countries per se, if you go to the Malawi and you would explain to them what they need to improve their healthcare environment, they get it. They know that they need to do certain things, and they're fully supportive. But they can't afford to do that because they've only got so much money, as we see from Valerie's comment, only got so much money, and they've got to do so much in terms of the supply chain whole. And so, fortunately, there are donors who have been very generous and very active in the space of driving supply chain improvement. And so, although it does cost a lot of money to do, there has been support provided. And I think there's downside to that. We want to try and see, a big drive is to try and get countries to take their own accountability. And so, so the idea is that you don't just continue providing solutions and the country never takes accountability, but that you actually get them to move to start taking their own accountability. And that's not an easy process either.
No, to go through all that work of a project of this magnitude and they're not going to take accountability is, short of being a big disappointment, I think is an understatement. So
yeah, but what you do see, Tanya, is what's nice is that there are countries that are leading. So if you look at Rwanda, they just are proactively chasing us down to say, well, this is what they want to do now, and this is what they want to do now, and they're using a lot of their own fiscus and budget to make it happen. They do still get some support, but they are making a lot of that happen. Ghana's doing a great job. We're seeing stuff in Kenya. South Africa has been on this journey, and I think one of the things that stood out for me is that during COVID, a lot of the principles that many people in the space have been almost advocating and driving for, actually people stood up and said, well, what happens now? And then you say, well, we've got to do this because this is the right thing to do. And people were well, let's then do it. And so all that resistance that we had experienced before suddenly crumbled when you had an emergency like this, and you were almost forced to improve your supply chain operation.
Thank you for that explanation. That's a positive. I have a question here. In your earlier slide, you showed a picture of piles and piles of paper. Was this referred to the medical field only? And what would be required to move into paperless for the medical field?
Yeah, so that was in one of the pharmacies that I took those photos. My finding, and I think Tanya is quite shocked, but I think there are still many environments, even in private sector. I now operate in the private sector a bit as well, and I do think many people still operate with kind of what I would call paper-based systems or kind of complicated Excel sheet systems. Yeah, and I think really in terms of moving that, it's kind of all the stuff that we've spoken about today. It's really training up people, getting leadership behind you, finding the right tools, and taking that first step and really moving into that process.
I see Jenny's comment, guilty, you should see my desk. Jenny, shame on you. And we are the supply chain management professional body. I think so. Without further ado, I'm going to wrap up, David. Thank you so much. I think a lot of food for thought here for people to go and think about where they are in their supply chain journey, what they need to do, how they need to do it. Obviously, change management's an issue, buying from the top, and buying from everybody generally to get a project like this going. So, I think that we'll wrap things up. David, are you going to be around? Will you pop into the tables, the network tables? If anybody's got questions that they'd like to talk to you directly about.
Yeah, happy to do that maybe for the next half an hour.
Okay, perfect.
I know that there's another session also starting.
So I think at this point we are in deserving of a well-deserved break. So we break up until 11:05. So that gives you 15 minutes to go rush off and have a coffee and refresh. So we will want you back here promptly at 11:05. Please complete the polls so we can get an evaluation of David's presentation, which I'm sure will be well received. And if we can please have a bit of some clapping hands and some well done. Great presentation, David. There we go. Everybody's loving it. So head off to the tables. David will be there. Go there, network, chat with your peers, and have some conversations while you're having a cup of coffee. And we will see you back here at 11:05. Thank you, David,
Thanks.
for your time and your really great words of wisdom in terms of what can be done in the public health space.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you. Bye.